for a while, and we were kind of making fun of Bert a little bit,
It turns out, he's a great kidder,
Yeah.
like you are, and I haven't seen him
Yeah,
since
so
then.
give him a call or text. We'll say, hey, you been okay or something.
I don't have his number.
Okay.
I'll do it.
Okay, let's go. So this is chapter 9. So yesterday we went through and we discovered which months have 29 days and which months have 30 days, and how to, the calendar is like this kind of big puzzle where everything has to fit in mathematically. So now we're going to talk about the sun now. Now again, to calculate where the moon's going to be, you have to know where the sun's going to be, right? Now there's what's called the Mahalach Emtsai, which is the average movement of the sun and the average movement of the moon, and then there's the Mahalach Amiti. There's the true movement. The true movement is because the Earth is not, and the orbits aren't perfectly centered, so they don't have an average. Okay, but anyways, let's go.
Circular, they're elliptical.
They're elliptical. So Shnas HaChama, the solar year, Yesh B'chachachmi Yisrael Shomer. Some rabbis in the Talmud say it's 365 days and a quarter of a day, which is 6 hours. And some say that it is a quarter of a day minus a little bit. So this is actually really an incredible subject. In the Talmud, there's two opinions. Now, it should be very easy to measure what exactly it is. So it's actually, in our terminology, it's 6 hours minus 11 minutes. Scientifically, according to science, it's 6 hours minus 11 minutes. That's scientifically. Yet, in the Talmud, it's a dispute, and of course, both opinions are right. And there is phenomenal explanation to how to rectify two opinions like that when you could just go out and measure it. So, and it's actually interesting in Jewish law. For some things, we calculate the solar year. There are a couple of things which have to do with the solar year. Some things we calculate the solar year according to the opinion that say minus 11 minutes, which that's a scientific opinion. And some say, no, it's 6 hours. And Jewish law says, yeah, it's 6 hours confidently. So it's a very, very fascinating subject. It's a long subject, but it's quite fascinating. Now,
But does the Talmud admit the possibility that there's a scientific...
No, the Talmud assumes they're both right, and it's a dispute. And how to qualify the dispute is a fascinating subject. There's several ways of doing it. Now, in the astronomical world, in the Chachmei Yavan, as the Rambam calls it, we assume that one of them had a good tool to measure it, and then the next guy had a better tool. That was basically, okay. So anyways, someone who says it's 365 and a quarter, so then you will have every 19 years, 1 hour, 485 chalakim left. And you will have between each tekufa, each season, 190 days, 7 hours, and half an hour, 7.5 hours. And when you know one tekufa,
What's a tekufa?
tekufa is a season. When you know one tekufa, you're going to see, yes, tekufa is like a season. When you know one tekufa, when you know one season, then you can add that and know when the next equinox or solstice is, right? So Nisan is when the sun, okay, so now the Rambam follows an astrology method. Now, does Judaism believe in astrology? Is a interesting thing, but I will tell you, from my experience, the astrology, which people call astrology today, is a drop of the bucket of what Judaism considers astrology. In other words, like, if someone tells you to buy a rock that has to do with your birthday, or someone says don't do that business deal because Mercury's and whatever, there is some truth to it, technically, but nowadays the methodology is like totally lost. There are a couple Jewish books about kind of sharing the way people viewed things and how from a long time ago. But even that, no one Jewish. Now, the reason why in Judaism we don't make a big deal about astrology is we believe that even if there's this astrology effects on the world from the different orbits and everything, Jewish people are not supposed to live their lives based on it. And you're supposed to know that Jewish people don't follow it. In other words, we have a direct connection with God. And that's why even if you're sick, you pray for a miracle, because we believe we have a direct connection to God. So, but it does come into times. So the Rambam is going to use it now for times. He's not using it now for astrology purposes, but he's using it more for the time, because you see in the calendar, each month is divided into, you have all these different, Cancer and all these different, when you're looking at the year. Okay, so
But
Nisan.
there are Jewish versions of those things.
Yeah, so now the Jewish versions, I've touched it a little bit in study. Someone showed me a book a couple years ago. So basically, the general idea is everything that moves in the world is constantly run by God. And there's much more spiritual energy to move a planet or to move something than physical energy. In other words, there's much more spiritual energy in it than the energy the action you can see. We just basically symptoms of movement and creation. We don't see the actual words of God and the spiritual energy. So, so now basically what the Judaism if you're aware of that energy, you can somehow tap into it. We're not really aware of that energy, and we don't even see the connect between the energy that moves. So all godly energy is all interconnected, and that's basically the gist of it. Okay, so Nisan is Nisan is when the hour and a half when the sun goes into Mazel of Taleh. Tammuz is when the sun is in Sartan. These are the different mazalis. Taleh is like a goat, Cancer. Tuv Tishrei is when the sun is at the Maznayim. Maznayim is a scale. Tevis is when the sun is in Mazel Gadi. So, if you're looking at the Rambam, basically, he's looking at the sun and he's looking at the movement of where the sun is every day and where the slightly moving, just a drop. And then he's, now, there's two movements that there's calculating. There's daily movement and yearly movement. So he's looking at yearly movement, which is just a drop. And he's calculating, okay, he has his protractor or whatever it's called, astronomical, and he's able to see, okay, the sun moves a little bit. Now the sun is in the Mazel of Taleh. So this is how people did it. Okay, Tevis is Gedi, Nisan is the beginning of the year according to this calculation. And okay.
So sorry to interrupt, but he's looking at the sun with respect to the constellations.
Yes, correct.
Appears to be.
Correct. So there's two movements that they're calculating. There's daily movement and yearly movement. And actually, as we'll mention later,
because everything is.
There's also a 28-year movement. 28-year movement is when the sun is in the exact original place that it was at the beginning of creation. And we actually have a mitzvah to do a blessing on the 28th year. And I think I must have been in 10th grade the last time it happened. Maybe it was 15 years ago. 20 years ago. Or I'm not sure exactly, 18 years ago. And all Jewish people did it. Did you do it then? It was a huge thing because you only do it every 20 years.
Aware of it.
You get to make a blessing every 28 years, and you do it right before Passover. So all Jewish people.
When the next one is?
Will I
be alive when that happens?
It must be. The next one is probably in 8 to 10 years. I'm not sure, but it was really beautiful. Everyone went in the street and made this special blessing. So that is basically because every year, what we call a year, as he'll explain, it's slightly off. The sun, it's slightly just an hour off. So every 28 years or so, the sun is finally in the original place that it was at the time of the creation. And it says, Haroya Cham B'Tkufasa, when you see the sun, the Mishnah says, when you see the sun in that place, you make this blessing. It's an interesting thing. If you look online, you can see videos of the Rebbe doing it. The Rebbe did it twice and made a big thing. And actually, the Rebbe worked out a lot of the interesting discussion and math about it, matching up with science. Very, very interesting. Okay, so when you know the beginning of, so now what we're going to do is when you know the beginning of a machzor, a complete machzor, from the beginning of creation until any year, and you take an hour and 485 seconds, and you gather them all together, and then, so basically what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to know exactly when the month of Nisan is. So I'm not going to go through the whole calculation now, but the Rambam until number 8, he's trying to calculate so you can know, because we're trying to calculate exactly when spring is. So this is just these are the mathematical equations. I don't want to go through them now; they're a little confusing, but it's definitely a good study. And there's probably 1,000 charts and videos online on these mathematical calculations. But basically, and so in Judaism, it's important to know exactly when spring is. spring is called Tkufas Nisan. Nisan is when Passover is. So the Torah says you have to make sure that Nisan falls out in spring. So,
But it doesn't say exactly what day in the Jewish calendar?
well, so the day of spring, the beginning of spring, as the Rambam says, is, well, you should be able to take your tools out and see exactly where the sun is. But in order to calculate what day spring is, what day that is, to know how to recognize it, you have to go back to the beginning of creation or back to a place that you know the rabbi set up. So the Rambam here does two calculations. Now, this is all according to the calculation of a year being 365 and 6 hours. The next chapter, the Rambam is going to go with the minus 11 minutes and show how to calculate according to the minus 11 minutes.
So he does in both.
So he does it in both, because they're both halachic, and they both have relevance halachically. Now, once you, eventually the Rambam is going to say, by the way, here, you can calculate from my birthday. And he says, this is a good place. Here's exactly how to calculate my birthday. You don't have to go all the way back to the beginning of creation anymore. My birthday, the moon and sun. So basically, there's two, it is actually really interesting.
So he marked his birthday with respect to the creation.
Yeah, so he marks his birthday with respect to his mathematical. So then you can know, and the people in his time, they know, okay, we don't have to start with 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. We're going to start with 2 years ago or 100 years ago. So it is interesting to know what's so amazing. One of the things I find so amazing is in the realm of the Gregorian calendar. The Rambam's way ahead in the Gregorian calendar.
Yeah.
So
there's a book that was published several years ago called The Sun and the Church, because the church was way behind in how it marked.
So Gregory the Eighth, it was the Gregorian calendar. Basically, what he did is they had a way of measuring where the sun should be on Christmas Eve. And they looked at it, and it was 2 weeks off.
And many cathedrals have it marked on the church floor, and they're wrong.
Well, so what happened is really interesting. I mean, I know the history because it's relevant in halacha as well, exactly, because we don't study Torah on the night of Christmas Eve. So when is that night? Well, it depends. The Catholic, it's a Jewish tradition. I'll tell you, another time. But the Catholics basically changed the calendar and added leap years. And it took stages. The Protestants did not. And so basically until the Iron Curtain fell, Christmas was on January 7th, because they eventually said, okay, we're just going to move it forward, because it was supposed to be at the winter solstice. So it's a very interesting subject. And Jewish law, so it's interesting when people in Jewish law, when is Christmas Eve, is actually a very interesting subject. Some people say it's December 24th, but some people say no, for 100 years, 200 years, it was January 6th.
Right.
So
And
there's
they still
yeah,
observe it.
correct.
Many
So
do.
it's a very, very interesting subject.
I am doing my astronomy homework. It turns out I don't have Mind Over Matter. I have a book of readings. It's a companion. And last night I did read the chapter on relativity and
Which book is this?
it has the same title, Mind Over Matter, that the one you referred to.
Yeah.
Except it's not the one with the Rebbe and
Branover.
Branover. It's another. It has exact same cover, but it's essays by different people, and each of the main topics. And I'll bring. I didn't bring it today, but I will. Anyway, there's a chapter there on relativity, which is something you referred to the other day. So I got the argument about not being able to tell what's moving in, because it all depends on where you're standing. So I understand that. But I had to order the actual Mind Over Matter book. And that set me down the rabbit hole of, I spent hours on the internet looking for sources on astronomy vis-a-vis Maimonides, because I got interested in it because of this. So I did buy a couple of books, older books that are on the way. But when I get the actual Brownover book, I'll,
Well, it's interesting because I knew a guy who worked in NASA, and he was an expert in this, a Jewish religious guy, but he couldn't accept the Rebbe's approach, which I found very interesting, because what a lot of people have a hard time accepting, what's necessary in the Rambam's approach is the necessary of how you view space and time. So if you, like, a lot of people are locked in, they look at space as infinite amount of emptiness, just going on forever. But really, we know that space is a substance. It's actually a substance in creation. So space has characteristics, and space can move and has energy in it. So it's hard to stretch your mind on, but it's all good, I'm no scientist. Bracha's grandfather was a scientist. He was an expert in these subjects. He was a mathematician in Israel. He was expert in these subjects. And he wrote on it. There's also a journal called Bora Torah. We actually have a bunch of them here, which is articles by scientists about Torah. Now, really, the Rebbe, his main call on science is, as he said, a lot of people have a problem with science, that they think science is absolutes. And he said that's a new thing in world history.
science is not absolute.
That's a new thing in world
Science is
history,
definitely not
where he says, like, because he learned in the Sorbonne and in Berlin with some of the greatest physicists, and he said that's really the problem, that people they consider science absolutes, and really science is not absolute, it's just a certain realm of study. So that's kind of where these subjects go. There is, of course, this physicist that I wanted to bring here, but he told me he can't fly here, in Chicago. So he told me that he doesn't get into these questions because he said these questions are garbage. He said because when you answer these questions, a lot of the premise is that science is absolute, and he's a theoretical physicist, or nothing is absolute. So he said, like, he can't even talk about this stuff. He talks about science and Torah, but he said he has a totally different approach because he's a physicist. He's a theoretical physicist. So I really like him.
I came across an article because I was looking for this discussion of geocentric versus heliocentric
Yeah.
and so forth. I came across a car. Are you familiar with inner.org? Do you know?
Oh, yes. I believe that's Rabbi Ginsburg. Is that Rabbi Ginsburg from Israel?
Well, I came across, I don't know, Torah and science.
To the right, but yeah, he's super interesting.
So can I
Yeah, sure.
wanted to read something. It's not, it says, although Copernicus initiated heliocentricity and totally negated geocentricity with his mathematical equations, this theory did not reach the general public until 1760. In the time of one of the great Hasidic masters, the Ruziner Rebbe, R-U-Z-H. Ruziner Rebbe. So, when this I was mentioning last night when we were talking on the phone, that when the disciples of a holy Ruziner, as he is called in Chabad tradition, heard of his apparently heretical scientific discovery that turned the world inside out, as it were, they brought the news to their Rebbe, probably anticipating his absolute denial that such a phenomenon could ever be reconciled, blah, blah, blah. However, his reaction was very unusual. When he was informed of this, that is, Copernicus and heliocentricity and so forth, he remained completely composed, and his response was a very special one. He said that whether the earth revolves around the sun or the sun revolves around the earth depends on the service of the tzaddikim,
Interesting.
the righteous Jews of the generation. The answer to the question of what revolves around what is not an absolute answer. If, for instance, the tzaddikim in this generation would serve God in a manner in which it would be correct to see Pluto at the center of the solar system, then, in some mysterious way, scientific discoveries would adapt to
Oh,
this.
interesting.
And then, I mean, it goes on and
That's
on,
really interesting.
discussing tzaddikim, and the tzaddikim of the generation determine all this stuff. So anyway, I am down the Alice
rabbit
in
hole.
Wonderland rabbit hole, and I'm not ready to discuss it because I haven't. But I did look for scientific evidence for the rejection of geocentricity, which is the root of the Rambam. Actually, it's very hard to find. It basically, the calculations of Copernicus, Tycho Brahe, a group of medieval astronomers, Galileo, led to the rejection of geocentricity. But if you try to put it into the scientific method, meaning as a testable hypothesis and blah, blah, I can't find it.
Interesting. Well, there were two things when I was studying this. My first time, I was in 10th grade actually, 11th grade. I was studying this my first time, getting really into it. So I had to break my mind a lot because there's two discussions. One is if the earth is spinning on its axis. Now there's opinions in the Torah that say it is, and opinions in the Torah that say it isn't. Now ultimately, the Rebbe's approach seems to be like, well, all movement requires a resistor, because if there's nothing resisting, there's no way of measuring movement. So the Rebbe kind of plays with it and says, well, so now the subject of mazalis also has to do with this subject, the subject that we mentioned before about astrology, because astrology, again, it's a very difficult subject for me because I don't really know. You can see that the rabbis in the Talmud, they're talking about something that we're just not aware of that knowledge. We're just simply not aware of it. So a lot of people are like, oh, astrology, that's not scientific. But they're not talking about what they consider astrology today. So it's interesting because when, in our Kabbalah class on Monday, we'll kind of talk slightly about it, but it's like really everything is in the world happens naturally, but really there are angels doing everything. Everything is, so we take a lot of things for granted. The sun rises. Well, really, it's like, no, it's work. There's people hired. There's angels and everything. In fact, the Midrash says, even every piece of grass has an angel on top of it saying, grow, 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 constantly. In other words, nothing's on autopilot. So these are deep subjects, they're interesting subjects.
So angels are doing the work of God?
Well,
and yet I thought God had his hand in everything.
He does it through angels.
But he does it through angels. See, yeah, okay.
Yeah. All right. Let's study some Gemara. So this is what we said. It was actually a very interesting subject last week. We said
What page are we on?
we are on page 54. This was actually a very, very interesting subject, in my opinion. Okay, so now what we said last week, we're on page 54.
5-4?
Yeah, he said that Rabbi Shimon Bar Levi said, the law goes like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is obviously one of the greatest sages in the Talmud. What did he say? So we said there are two statements that he said, potentially. One is, he said, you can say Shema right before dawn and right after dawn, and you've done the mitzvah of saying Shema at night and done the mitzvah of saying Shema on the day. Right before dawn and right after dawn. And we said this goes with Rabban Gamliel in the Mishnah, who says, when is the nighttime Shema time? Even though you shouldn't say it after midnight and everything like that, ultimately, the time is dawn, right? Morning, you can't say it after morning, that's day, that's no longer the time of lying down.
That's the end of the...
Yeah, so he says, all the different opinions of the rabbis saying to say it before midnight, that's just so you don't fall asleep and wake up after dawn. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said sometimes a person does a mitzvah, they say it before dawn and after dawn, and they did it for night and for day. And we said...
But can't you just set your timer on your phone so you don't have to...
You can, but you have to keep your phone charged if your phone's not charged.
Thank you so much.
So okay. Then he said another statement. The other statement was actually a little bit more complex. He said sometimes a person can say Shema before sunrise and after sunrise, and that's considered for the night and for the day. Now, to say night is before dawn is pretty easy, but to say night is after dawn, before sunrise, that's a difficult statement. Now,
yeah, well, that's a gray area.
That's a gray area. He said because some people still consider that night. So we said, actually, someone came from Israel, and he said, actually, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi did not say the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. This is what happened. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's son got married. And there were two rabbis who went to the wedding party, and they got drunk. And they fell asleep. And they woke up after dawn. So they went to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and they said, what do we do? We missed the Shema last night. So he said to them, say it now before sunrise, because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says sometimes you can say it before sunrise, after sunrise, and kedai lismaich alav b'shas hadachak. You can rely on him in extreme cases. In extreme circumstances, you can rely on Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So that is what we said, right? You can rely on him on extreme circumstances and do that, but you should not do it in the first place.
But I mean, what if you're in that circumstance?
So then then you can rely on him.
So are you just totally?
So if you missed it and you wake up before sunrise, you should say it before sunrise.
Right, but then it also says that the rabbi didn't rule in accordance with the opinion of the other rabbi, and in this case there are no exigent circumstances. One may not rely on this ruling. So they're not right by doing that, according to that.
Well, when there's no exigent circumstances, right? So when there are, you could rely on it. Right? So that would be, don't plan on it. Don't plan on it.
Okay.
If you're a soldier on the Gaza border and you're not able to concentrate and say Shema, so it's understood you could still do the mitzvah after dawn, right? Don't give up on it. But it's actually interesting because in Jewish law, if you say it after dawn, it's not considered if you said it for the morning and the night. You can only be for one. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is actually intended in his words is at sunrise, right, is going to be your morning now, right? So if you want to say the Shema, you have to do it twice. If you're doing it for dawn, you can't do it. If you're doing it after dawn for the day, it can't be for the night before. If you're doing it for the night, then it can't be for the day. Okay. Maisa Shabbat Banav. Okay, so now the Mishnah says another story, and we're going to analyze the story in the Mishnah. We're on page 54, fourth class paragraph. Maisa Shabbat Banav says that the rabbi said, this is what the Mishnah said, the rabbi says you can say Shema until midnight. That's what the rabbi said. Maisa Shabbat Banav. So it says there's a story. The sons of Rabbi Gamliel came to him and said, we missed the Shema. What should we do? It's past midnight. They came from a wedding. So he told them, say it now. Because this that the rabbi said till midnight is kidei laharchik, to distance you from missing it.
Fence around the Torah.
It's a fence around the Torah, exactly. So the Gemara asks, until Rabbi Gamliel told his sons that the rabbis are only till midnight, they never knew that? It was unknown? Was it unknown until then? So hachik kamrale. So this is actually the Gemara, that's how the conversation went, but the Gemara is going to insert and redefine the words of the conversation. This is what his son said to him. Rabbanan pligi ilavach. The rabbis disagree with you. We know your opinion, as you could say, till morning. But the rabbis disagree with you. And the rule is in those times, when you have the concept of the rabbis means the majority. And in Jewish law, majority rules. So the law is dad is not like you. And he knows that. The law is like him. Oy Dilma, Rabbanan kavasach svirlu. Or they said, did the rabbis disagree with you and the law is not like you? Or maybe they hold like you. This that they said until midnight, this that the rabbi said until midnight, was not because they disagree with you absolutely. It was just to protect. They said, Rabbi Gamliel, you're right, but you're a risk taker. We don't want to take those risks. Amar lahu, so Rabbi Gamliel answered them, Kavasi svirlu v'chayav matam. The rabbis agree with me. And the reason why they did chatzos is it is in order to distance you from the sin. So again, let's just go through what they did here. The Gemara said his own sons didn't know their father's opinion, that it was until morning. It says, no, they did know. They went to their father, and their conversation was actually like this. They said, what should we do? What they were asking when they said, what should we do? What they were asking was, do the rabbi, we know we have to follow the rabbis, we don't follow you. You're aware of that as well. That's not a secret. You can disagree, but if the majority of the rabbis ultimately define the law, that's understood. So they said, we know your opinion, but is your opinion worth anything? Because the rabbis disagree with it. Is your opinion absolutely opposed to them? Or do they actually agree with you and they're just doing it? So he confirmed with them that the rabbis actually agree with me by default initially, and they added a protection. So you can, okay, so
right. So that's like a yellow street light. Midnight is
exactly.
is caution.
Yeah, it's like the Iron Dome,
So,
right?
So this is a way of saying we're both right.
So he's saying the rabbis, we don't really have a dispute. The rabbis are just saying be extra careful. And either Rabbi Gamliel said you don't have to be extra careful, or he said I'm not talking about that. Do whatever you want. But I'm talking about when is the point of the Torah is talking about.
Does Rabbi Gamliel base that statement on something? Or he's just asserting?
We're going to get into the statement first. I mean, what he's saying is that the rabbis agree with him that the time when you lie down is the whole night. The whole night. But the rabbis added in the Mishnah, he said, for publicity's sake, to publicize, that the rabbis made a rule it has to be till midnight. Because probably the rabbis saw a lot of people come to them, a lot of questions, say, hey, I missed it. What do I do? I woke up in the morning, I forgot. So the rabbis probably saw that. They said, we have to have preventative medicine. It's not enough to...
So did he actually believe that the rabbis, the majority opinion was a fence around the Torah
Yes.
and not actual halacha?
Well, the rabbis are saying, first, it's actual halacha because we made a fence. So yeah, he believed that.
Okay.
So now what he's saying is if you, and we said earlier, it's very serious, but if you miss it, you should still say it because you are still fulfilling the mitzvah. Even the rabbis will say it, try and set your phone to say it before midnight because if you say it after midnight, you might miss it one night.
Okay, so I have the next question then. So what if I were to fall asleep and I miss it completely and I wake up well after dawn, well after sunrise? It's a transgression. What's going to happen to me?
Put to death.
So the truth
I like lashes better.
is you have to say I'm sorry to God. You got to say I'm sorry to God and mend your relationship because when you transgress, at least in mystical Judaism, the worst part about the transgression is the transgression itself. The punishment is actually the loophole to get out of the transgression, where you could say, okay, I paid my bills, I did my due. But the transgression itself is what separates you and your heart and your soul from God. So what should you do? You should probably say, God, I'm going to set my alarm. I'm going to make sure I say it. Nowadays, night is like 6 o'clock. I'll make sure I say it at 6 o'clock before I eat dinner. I won't eat dinner till I whatever. That way I won't miss it. That's probably what you should do.
Well, I have an app that tells me so.
Well, so
Well, you've separated yourself from God, so you got to repair that.
Well, so, it might get difficult, like on Friday nights, if you daven early. So you say Shema before nightfall, really. And now
Well,
you have
you
to...
always remind me.
Yeah, so now you have to say it again after nightfall. Now, really, if you're following the Siddur, you should say the evening prayers, and if you should say it after nightfall. But if you happen to say it before nightfall for whatever reason, then you should say the Shema before you go to bed. So those things will cover you. But sometimes you're driving all-nighter, and you're driving all-nighter and you might forget. So, the rabbis are saying, remember, before midnight, because we don't want to, get to a hotel and you say, let me rest my eyes for a couple minutes or something like that. These are the different circumstances where someone might forget to say the Shema.
Or you're taking the red eye.
Yeah,
You
never
forgot.
again. I'm never going to do that again.
All right. V'lo yizil b'vad amru. Now we learned in the Mishnah, so it says in the Mishnah, not only that, not only do I say you should say the Shema, but even the rabbis, they only said midnight to distance people from making a mistake. But Rab and Gamliel, mi kamer ad chatzais, takatanu l'zar amru. Now, does Rabban Gamliel say midnight? That he teaches that not only did they say, Rabban Gamliel does not restrict the time for recitation until midnight. So why does he say not only do they say, implying that he agrees with the stringency? Even the rabbis who say midnight, so he's saying, Rabbi Gamliel, by the way, doesn't necessarily agree with the rabbis. His opinion might be like, no, you always have this in the media where sometimes, remember with COVID, you'd have, they'd create a narrative for the people, which they didn't necessarily believe in or didn't necessarily know. And a lot of people would say, no. What's this evidence? Do we need to wear masks? Do we not need to wear masks? First they said, don't wear masks. There's no need for them. And then they said, so I don't know exactly Rabban Gamliel's opinion, but it could be he said, tell people you got to do it at night. Let them decide when to do it on their own. You don't want to mix it, mix up.
So is he rationalizing his leniency?
He's saying, Rabbi Gamliel is saying, no, he's not. He's just telling his sons, the halacha is like the rabbis, I'm aware of that, but know that even the rabbis agree with me. Even the rabbis agree with me. So, you have, there's certain examples like that where, let's say you have certain rules in kosher, which the rabbis instituted so people wouldn't make a mistake and not realize. Because the average Joe won't make a mistake. I'll give you an example. In the laws of kosher, there's a certain dye, which is commonly used in America, called carmine. It comes from a beetle. It's a red dye. It has no flavor. Is it kosher or not? So technically, most opinions would say it is technically kosher. It's a dye. It's not food. But all the kosher...
It's still something that you eat.
Well, but correct. But you don't eat it. You color things with it, and then you're eating it. You're eating it. You're not like ingesting food. It's not food, right?
But if it's not kosher, then doesn't that make the kosher food you're eating?
Yes. So
kosher?
we actually, all rabbis and kashrus organizations say it's not kosher, and if they put it in your juice or whatever it is, then you're not allowed to eat it. Now, I once asked somebody. I said, why is it that the OU and whatever, there's many opinions that rely on carmine or gelatin? Gelatin comes from a bone. So it's technically not really a food. Bone is not really considered a food. So he said the reason is because the consumers will get confused. The consumers will get confused, and therefore we have to make black and white laws for the kashrus organization so consumers don't say, oh, it's a bug, you can eat bugs, or whatever, it's a bone, you can eat a bone, So a lot of these things are for the consumer. So Rabbi Gamliel was saying, hey, it's not true. Now, there are kashrus organizations which are like conservative and reform, which allow gelatin and carmine. And by the way, we don't trust those kashrus organizations at all because they don't follow Jewish law. They don't even claim to. But it's important to remember that sometimes when you reveal and you think it's a conspiracy, it's like there's consumers out there, which there's a plan for the consumers. So the rabbis here, basically, Rabbi Gamliel is saying, he's admitting the rabbis are creating it consumer friendly until midnight. But you should know that if you miss it, it's important information to know that you should still say it until dawn. And that's why it's in the Mishnah. The rabbi who authored the Mishnah put it in so people would know that. Like also, it's interesting. But you have places like in Alaska, when I was there, midnight was like 1:45 and dawn was 1:55, right? And the evening is like 11 p.m., right? So you have 2 hours to do your evening Shema. If you miss it, then you can't do it. So these are now if you would wait till after midnight, right? You only have about 10 minutes until dawn, and then you missed it. According to